Yenan in May 1942 as part of the Yenan ratification movement, which lasts from 1942 to 1944. When people talk about ratification, actually they are frightened because that also means elimination or marginalization, and the impacts actually were very strong. The ratification movement in Yenan, launched by the China Communist Party, from now on I will name it CCP, which controlled this city in the Lofen Shanxi province at the time, which is a very remote city at the time, and also the town in the suburban area. The meetings later became commonly known as the Yenan Forum on Literature and Art. Over 100 leading figures in literature and the arts attended the forum, many of whom took the floor to speak, and Mao delivered the introductory and concluding speeches. The attendees involved some famous figures: Ding Ning, a modern revolutionary writer; He Qifang, a modern poet, essayist, and literary critic who taught at the influential Lu Xun Academy of Fine Arts in Yenan; and also Ouyang Sanjun, who is the founding father of modern Chinese drama. Mao organized the Yenan Forum to address numerous debates and disagreements among artists and literary writers of the CCP. Some argue for the primacy of art over politics, while others asserted that art should be independent of Marxism-Leninism, to which the CCP referred, to ensure freedom of individual expression positions. Others stated that art should serve politics by revealing political incorrectness and the social darkness, so-called, and by presenting issues and characters to be criticized, placed, and confirmed. But some advocate the ironic style of the literary master Lu Xun. Mao invited these prominent figures to the forum to exchange views regarding artists' positions in society, art strategies, stylistic issues, readers' issues, and subject matter. So the three meetings of the forum were held in 1942 on May 2nd, May 16th, and May 23rd, and their details and the content continue to be discussed and interpreted till today, with the focus mainly on how Mao reacted to and reconciled the various positions, and finally stated his own views on the future direction of art and literature production in Communist China. Mao's introductory and concluding speeches addressed the five main problems that have been hotly debated by the party's literary and art circles, including the obsession with expressing darkness, the production of works that were divorced from reality and the masses, debates over whether Marxism hindered literary and artistic creation, excessive tolerance of intellectual shortcomings, and the lack of solidarity among literature and art experts. Mao concluded that art and literature were for the people, and primary for workers, peasants, and soldiers. Art should speak to the masses and be easily comprehended. Instead of being abstract and serving individual egos, art and literature should aid to change society by elevating the thoughts and appreciation levels of the people. The talks were gradually developed into a series of policy documents over the following 2 to 3 years. Once implemented, these policies result in artists venturing into the countryside and visiting factories and front lines where they created works based on their living experiences of their venturing that enhance the popularity of their work among the masses. Actually, they have to farm and they have to labor. Critics note the influence of the Yenan period, during which the CCP won large-scale peasant support, and soon after that led to its political and military victories in 1947 to 1949. So this is a very important event. This success was not only the product of the oppressive Japanese occupation, but also the result of Mao's creative formulation of policies and organization methods. It directly followed the mass line policy of Marxism-Leninism in the beginning, but has developed further its nationalistic purpose versus the peasant society structure in China and the feudalism, of course. So the sending of intellectuals to Yan'an was the decisive move in linking urban intellectuals with peasants to create an effective political alliance. The Japanese occupation of large areas of China, including the entire seaboard, led to tremendous socio-economic, political, and military changes, which had also become the basis for literary and artistic creativity. Mao emphasized the importance of cultural workers being closely connected to the masses and of delivering political messages rather than individual experimentation. For his beliefs that art should be nurtured in the real soil of living. This idea soon spread from the Lushun Academy to Yenan to other border regions, even when many institutions of higher learning in the coastal cities fell under the Japanese control. The ratification movement soon provided relatively clear and detailed guidelines to intellectuals and artists in the revolution about how to create new democratic literature and art from local and national soils, and the political values of the arts recognized by the CCP. Alan Judd suggested the Yenan Talks can be viewed as a site of an important delivery of policy statements by Mao on the positions and functions of art and literature. They have also become the main reference and foundation of literature and art censorship in the new China. That's why I'm very interested in this topic. They had immediate effects on the form and the content of Chinese music, performing arts, literature, films, visual arts, and design, demonstrating the dominant socialist spirit and approaches with new respects for folk and mass style emerge. So you can see on the left is a typical propaganda Chinese poster. And then on the right side, you will see where Yan'an is near, almost in the center of China, but played a very important role as a guerrilla site and the battlefield and the battle center and the revolutionary ideological, kind of site. The Yenan Talks have remained culturally relevant in recent times, with reports recalling the details of the members photographed, the setting, the weather, and the environment, and Mao's gestures and reactions to the speakers. It is as if the event was a show, but also sacred, and the talks are like the manuscript of a holy book that prescribe what artists should and should not do. Mao's views of art delivered at the forum have been reinforced as the anniversary of Yenan Talks have been marked and was celebrated every 5 years, even now. The Ministry of Culture announced a month of celebration for the 70th anniversary of the forum in 2012, in which the main art and literature political agenda set out by Mao in his lectures was reviewed. One of the most renowned quotations from Mao's speeches at the forum is this, quote, "In the world today, all culture, all literature and art belong to definite classes and adhere to definite political lines. There is in fact no such thing as art for art's sake, art that stands above classes, or art that is detached from or independent of politics," unquote. Mao outlined the relationship between politics of art and art in the context of revolution, arguing that they were only contextual and pragmatic rather than absolute criteria for judging the value of art. Mao believed that art could transform reality just via reflection. When everyday life is chaotic and complex, he believed that art can project the better vision of the future. He pointed out that the masses did not need art to remind them of their daily experience of hunger, cold, and oppression, but to depict the possibility of transcending their sufferings. In revolutionary terms, art should remind the masses of their own collective power and future. Therefore, artwork should be bright, positive, and progressive. The implications were that art and literature should be integrated into the revolutionary movements and be subordinated to the party. Therefore, it is important to transform the thoughts of artists and intellectuals through criticism and self-criticism, as suggested in the Yenan Talks. This had also become central to the resolution of cultural disagreements and contradictions. Scholar Fu Qinin reviews how the Yenan Forum was received and read in the West and identifies three waves of development since its publication. First, it was during the 1950s and 1960s when sinologists took a negative view based on social, political, and ideological critiques instead of any in-depth analysis of the text. Then came the second wave of criticism in the 1970s and 1980s, which followed Richard Nixon's 1972 visit to China. This brought about the gradual normalization, so-called, of the Sino-Western relationship, which led to a shift in critical theory among sinologists, who began to study Mao's text of the Yenan Talks from the perspective of neo-Marxist literary theory, which considers central issues of modern and contemporary literature. The texts were thus read more seriously, led to the discussion of Chinese Marxist literary theory, and they were related to the work of earlier Chinese Marxist critics such as Xu Choubai. And the third wave is within the context of globalization in China, during which Mao's talks were examined in English language scholarship. When the attitudes and the methods changed, Fu Qinin attributes this latest development to the advancement of market socialism and China's emergence in global markets, through which various discourses of knowledge about modernity and postmodernity are involved. He suggests that with the rise of critical theory in the English-speaking world, Mao's notion of cultural hegemony and the mediation between aesthetics and politics are re-evaluated against the discourse of Western Marxist aesthetics and post-colonial theories. However, the dominant reading of the Yenan Talks was of Mao's authoritarian sense of control and emphasis on social function over individual expression or artistic exploration. Critic Liu Gang provides a deeper level of the reading, arguing that the National Forum played a major role by mediating Mao's interpretation of Marxism. Mao emphasized on specific Chinese practices, and the solutions came through the process of learning from intellectuals, who, by living with the Chinese masses, would take a stand for the proletarians. Liu Gang suggests that popularization through a national form was not merely a process of aesthetic creation, but was first and foremost a process of political, ideological, and moral transformation by the urban intellectuals. Bonnie McDougall provides a very detailed account and reading of the text of the Yenan Talks. You can see her book here. She has high regards for Mao's grasp of literary issues, the ways he remained close to traditional literature, and saw no issue in merging traditional Chinese elite and popular cultures. The Yenan Forum illustrates how Mao wanted to organize the loose collection of literary doctrines by declaring a clear and firm literary policy for the situation, thus uniting the whole country. The CCP was stationed at Yenan at the time, which was a remote North Shanxi town from which the communists could mobilize the peasants in guerrilla warfare against the Japanese. In this city, in this town, the national spirit reached its peak, and as McDougall described, intellectuals visit from the cities to observe and participate in a type of social change that represented to them the only possible path to a vigorous and independent new China, one that would be free of the Japanese invasion and the corruption of the nationalists. Mao covered 5 main topics in the first speech he delivered on May 2nd, 1942, including positioning whom should art and literature work serve, the artist's attitude, the audience, the work, and the educational value of art and literature. Mao can be regarded as narrowing his focus to the basic and essential problem, which is the question of the audience. Mao's inclination toward realism in literature reflected his focus on the audience and how he regarded literary figures as social leaders. So art and literature had to serve the masses and were for the masses only, with no focus on the individual in the creative process. Artists has to be guided by the budding forms of literature and art within the masses through living and working with them, as all forms of art emerge from the basic nature of people's lives. Mao stated that literature and art were not independent of politics, but in the later versions, he made this more specific, suggesting that art should not simply follow the political demands of class, but should serve the masses and the revolution. Therefore, the art and literary works during Mao's time were viewed as stereotypical and black and white in character and in storytelling, as typified by the so-called revolutionary model operas like The White-Haired Girl and Red Detachment of Women. So here, I would like to talk about The White-Haired Girl a little bit. In 1944, in Yenan, they produced a ballet opera. It's very interesting, but the ballet form, which is petit bourgeois form of production, but is performed among socialists. The White-Haired Girl is based on a real-life story, so-called maybe a folk legend, about a white-haired goddess in Hebei province in 1940s. It was highly praised by the leadership of the Communist Party and achieved great success, and we were told that it moved Mao to tears. The story is about the peasant woman Xia, who escapes into the mountains and forests after being raped by the landlord Huang. All the landlords are bad people. They did everything. They rob, they rape, all the bad things that they have done. So her hair, after hiding in the mountains, suddenly turns white. Then she is later rescued by a communist soldier. Dai Chun actually was her fiance before he joined as a member of the 8th Root Army, 八路军. So the ballet opera deeply reveals a sharp contradiction between the landlords and the peasants, angrily accuses the evils of the landlord class, warmly praises the Communist Party and the New Society. So we all name it a work of political propaganda in China. It's still performing, it's still very popular. So I'm going to play for just 2 minutes of it. I should try to rescue Xia. I think the basic structure of the White-Haired Girl hasn't changed until now, even though there are some more modern version of it. And you can see that Mao was more concerned with philosophical or ideological attitudes and political needs than the relationship between form and content in art and literature. According to McDougall, Mao twice mentioned socialist proletarian realism as the inquired or required literary style, although he had not clearly defined it. He emphasized developing a new mentality of resistance, self-reliance, self-sacrifice, generosity, and courage. And he asked the group to ensure that any romantic or moral elements were within the critical context to defend against the harsh social reality. And you can also see Mao summarized the previous literary debates in Yenan, stressing that a writer's work should be judged by its social effects. After the 1950s, the policies derived from the Yenan Talks were relaxed, but they again represent the dominant guiding principles for creativity in the Cultural Revolution movement of the late 1960s. Maybe we can say that the most intense censorship and persecution of individual artists and authors occurred after the Yenan Talks were widely circulated in China during the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s and the mid-1970s. You can read the history and name the figures who were persecuted. And the talks had varying practical effects, though, after the 1970s, when Western modern and contemporary art influenced China through its open up policy. So, in a sense, we see the spring in the especially in the 1980s, a lot of work was translated, the Western classics, and the art circle, the visual art especially, are very open-minded. But only after Deng Xiaoping's condemnation of the Cultural Revolution in 1979 were the talks reassessed. As a critique points out, Mao's doctrine that literature and art were subordinate to politics became regarded as incorrect in 1982. But it was very short-lived, and it was reconfirmed that art should reflect the reality of the lives of the workers and peasants. The content of art and literature in China are still following the correct political morality and the guidance of the CCP. Arts and entertainment could not be too dark or superstitious. The Skyline explains why horror movie genre has been so limited in China, and ghost and horror movies are not really that featured. Films should not be excessively satirical or mock public figures, and definitely not the police. The police cannot die without a good cause. Soldiers, party members, or the government. Art must convey a realistic view of history, and any depiction of historical figures must emphasize their heroic qualities. Productions made for export must convey the positive sense of the Great China. Those work that involve ethnic populations, particularly those from border regions like Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia, remain extremely sensitive. Art and entertainment aimed at children must be morally uplifting or at least not viewed as negative. So this direction was reinforced by Xi Jinping's policy on art and literature following the opening policy of Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s. On October 15, 2014, Xi Jinping gave his speech at the Forum on Literature and Art in Beijing, which echoed Mao's agenda delivered in Yenan, but was appropriated and idealized to emphasize the development of a strong China. His speech was regarded as putting less emphasis on the historical revolution and communism, but as encouraging artists to celebrate party-sanctioned morality, cultural heritage, and nationalist sentiment. She stated that the main purpose of art was to infuse reality with optimism for the future. Quote, if literature and art creation is only pure recording and description of the status quo, and the first-hand display of hiddenness, there would be no eulogizing of the light, no expression of ideals, no guidance of morality, and so it would be impossible to inspire the people to progress. He also said that, quote, to shine light on real life, use the night to dispel darkness. Use the beautiful and good to vanquish the ugly and the bad. Let people see beauty, hope, and dreams ahead. So the text was published a year later in 2015, enriched by examples from modern literature in both the Chinese and the world classics, and with more detailed discussion. We can be pretty sure that that was composed by a team of writers. In October 2015, new rules were issued days after the release of the full text of Xi Jinping's speech, in which he asked artists to put material returns aside and create works that embody both artistic quality and political correctness. That means he was not actually particularly happy to the work that were produced. He said, quote, "Creating shoddy works is not only a kind of injury to the arts, but also a kind of injury to the moral life of society. Entertaining the simple sense organs will not create or equate to a happy spirit. The arts must win the people's approval. Fancy, but ineffectual work and egotistical self-promotion are not acceptable," unquote. His authors add more information and example to this edition in 2015 to present a conservative and patriotic views of the arts. It said, "Our contemporary literature and art must evermore make patriotism into the main melody of literature and art creation, guide the people in establishing and upholding correct view of history, rules of the nation, the country, and culture, and strengthen the backbone and confidence of the Chinese people," unquote. So the agenda deviated from Mao's historic Yenan Talk, in which Mao said that creative ambitions must first serve the people and the revolutionary cause. In addition, Xi's approach was informed by the moral high ground. What are the moral high ground? Which they are differed from Mao's propaganda tactics in the 1940s China. It is undoubtedly a sign of patriotism. Xi followed Mao in his arguments against formalistic art and the mentality of art for art's sake, though Xi recognized that the global art market was developing rapidly in China and that artifacts were becoming cultural commodities. His priority was that art must contribute to the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. The critical function of art was to condemn anti-social or anti-Chinese phenomena. Xi used the term 美好 to describe a better life in China, meaning that life is aesthetically pleasing and morally ordered. The duty of an artist is to produce visions of a good life, and the responsibility of the CCP is to create the socio-economic conditions for its realization. Through the 美好 principle, art can promote a positive image of the nation and address any negative connotations with strong patriotism. Critic and scholar George Chin suggests that the essential point here is a potential halting of artistic creativity and practice, which can dictate a cultural world driven by popular tastes. So is that a problem? I think we can discuss it in our Q&A time. Ironically, Xi warned that literature and art would lose its direction when absorbed into the market economy. In contrast to the subsequent rules and censorship he imposed, Xi Jinping, in his earlier speech, urged artists to hold high ideals, step with the times, and to innovate through the individuality of their art. He suggested they should construct a vigorous, healthy, tranquil, and harmonious atmosphere and advocated discussion between different viewpoints and schools of thought, and that style, themes, forms, and methods should be fully developed. She proposed that art and ethics should focus on artistic value and should present beauty and virtue to the world, that artists should strive to win the love of the people and embrace noble professional integrity while presenting a good social image. His speech echoed the ideas of Mao Yenan Talks, which suggested art and literature must reflect society through serving the people and socialism by satisfying the spiritual and cultural needs of the people. Mao said that of the various ways of creating art, the most fundamental one is, quote, taking root among the people and taking root in life, unquote. So his message about the bright side of art can be discerned in his earlier pronouncements, which he suggests that artists and authors should use light to dispel darkness, as I have already quoted. So Xi was of the opinion that art should be aimed at integrating social and economic effects, and that ideological and artistic success would be well received in the market. But he never talked about the logical relationship between the two. It's not really that clarified. He said, quote, "We must integrate the condition of the new age with inheriting and carrying forward China's excellent traditional culture, and inheriting and carrying forward the spirit of Chinese aesthetic." The comparison between the Yenan Talks and the Xi's talk on literature and art reveals that both adhere to the ideas of people holding principal position in the country, advocating the leadership of the art party and the guidance of Marxism. Both refer to traditional Chinese culture as the foundation of creativity. However, Xi Jinping, under the economic and social context of China in his era, developed new ideas, judgments, and requirements. His speech in 2014 was delivered when China was becoming more economically wealthy, and at the time Xi was promoting the China Dream. The Beijing Olympics of 2008 before him also signified or signaled the great rejuvenation of the nation. We didn't expect that in the Olympic Games we will be able to see such a grand opening and closing ceremony, and was wondering why does it matter to the Olympic Games. Xi's speech in 2014 was delivered when China was becoming more economically wealthy, and at the time Xi was promoting the China Dream. We could say that the Beijing Olympics of 2008 signaled the great rejuvenation of the nation that he has already talking about. So it was delivered his speech was delivered 72 years after the Yenan Talks, and the rapid economic development and consumerism brought the need for artistic and cultural developments, and directions were provided to writers and artists regarding the value of literary and artistic work. It was said that they should create works that meet the needs of the people, carry forward the core values of socialism, and enhance the cultural identity of the Chinese nation, as he said clearly in his speech. But did Xi inherit Mao's literary and artistic thoughts? Ma Yu, a scholar and critic, admits that there were a few. The first being the common assumption that art and literature should serve the people, which is very clear. Artistic creativity was based on the understanding of the lives of the masses and aimed to reflect their broad social life. Second, there was the recognition that the needs of the people represented the fundamental values of art and literature. Third, art and literature were for the people, and so artists must love the people. Other commentators suggest that Xi did not stress the agenda of art as serving politics or the party to the same extent as that of Mao. In the Yenan Talks, the virtues of art and literature lay with the politics of the proletariats and the masses, rather than the politics of an individual artist. Xi mentioned in his speech that the leadership of the party guarantees the support and development of socialist arts and literature, and that writers and artists should hold strong political beliefs and have a keen political consciousness. He was also more alert to Western ideologies and urged Chinese artists to develop a nationalistic and cultural stance for the people. So in the Yenan Talks, Mao promoted the important position of literature and art as basic revolutionary forces and regarded them as the tools and operation of ideological changes and political revolution. I agree with Ma Yu's reading that Mao used art and literature to win the hearts of the people, to represent the national spirit, and to promote the victory of the democratic revolution. But during Xi's era, they were important means of enhancing cultural confidence and realizing the China dream of national rejuvenation with prosperity through market economies. So they have also become important manifestations of the country's soft cultural power and comprehensive national strength. These factors continue to be directed at supporting China's current economic, political, and social development. Xi's further developments, based on Mao's agenda for literature and art, relate more to social function than artistic achievement. Mao was more concerned with the relationship between art and politics in the context of the Revolutionary War and the People's Liberation Cause. Also, the antagonistic oppositional approach and polarization were the attitudes that Mao advocated, as he concluded that literature was subordinated to politics. Xi Jinping wanted art and literature to reflect the times, and he thought that outstanding works should be produced to demonstrate the greatness of China and its people. According to Xi Jinping, the virtue of art is to illustrate the good lives people can attain and to motivate them to achieve a better life. Another point of comparison is the relation of art and literature to the masses or the people. Mao emphasized the understanding of the ideological, emotional, and real lives of the subjects, implying that the work has to be comprehensible and for the people. Xi also stresses serving the people and socialism by grasping what people would want to read and appreciate, which could change along with their living standards, ways of living, and spiritual needs, in addition to the improvement and enhancement of their artistic taste and style preferences. Critics read the Yenan speech as an example of emerging masses literary port in China in the 1940s, but Xi Jinping's speech is a cultural construction in the governance of the country under the new era. So it was common that Xi Jinping had progressed with the times and put forward new ideas, perspectives, artistic and moral requirements for artistic creativity. And Xi's image is read as a new type of Chinese leader. This is circulating in media. And instead of a traditional rigid leader of the Communist Party. Some of Mao's thought in the Yenan Talks, along with Lenin and Marx were mentioned in Xi's speech, and also Mao's keyword revolution, and noted that it was replaced by rejuvenation in Xi's usage. Xi said, without the flourishing and the prosperity of Chinese culture, there will be no great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The rejuvenation requires major material strength. It also requires major spiritual strength. Without the rigorous guidance of advanced culture and the great wealth of the people's spiritual world, and without the incessant strengthening of the nation's spiritual strength, a country and a nation cannot stand tall among the forests of the nation of the world. Well, we were very amazed that earlier this year, despite the spread of the pandemic, that Xi Jinping insisted to present the Winter Olympics, the Beijing Winter Olympics, and then it was regarded as a success, and then especially the grateful words given during the closing ceremony. Art should therefore serve to make Chinese culture a global force and position China in the world map according to Xi, as well as sports activities, of course. Xi looked at the irreversible trend of globalization and how it would affect art. He aimed to control and monitor art in China and to keep it within the principles and the moral codes that he proposed. This includes encouraging patriotism and restrictions on incoming foreign art products like films and visual arts, and that imported art had to comply with Chinese censorship under Xi's regime. So comparing the moral agenda in Mao and Xi's speeches on literature and art, along with how morality clauses were applied and interpreted by artists in China, one can see how artist creativity has developed in the nation, following the grand presentation of the bright side of people's living in China as requested and enforced. So to end this speech or talk, I would like to show the trailer of a film, Map. I wonder how many of you have seen that film. It was produced by China in 2018, and its reference is Hollywood's production, Steven Spielberg's Jaws, which had great impacts on me because until now I dare not to swim in the ocean after seeing that film in 1975. Yeah, but only that in fact the shark is bigger, it can kill more. And so when you look at the trailer, you can feel if the big shark represents China and this new generation represented by the little girl in the film, the setting is in Sanya Resort in Hainan Island. If the pandemic is over, I encourage you to go to Sanya Resort. It's beautiful, it's very wealthy, has a beautiful beach, and it is demonstrated as Meihao, the prosperous life in China nowadays. So when you see the trailer, you think about more than 70 years ago when the discourses on art and literature was launched in Yenan, a very poor province, and how much changes have been undergone in the country.
What's that?
There's a monster outside.
What you people discovered is bigger than we ever thought possible. How big is that thing?
It was the largest shark that ever existed.
A living fossil.
Thought to have been extinct for over 2 million years. Wrong.
My God.
It's Megalodon.
He's kidding, right?
That thing's out there. We need to find it and kill it.
Why don't you just put a tracker on it? Did you guys ever watch Shark Week?
He looks heroic, but he's kind of got a negative attitude.
Chew on this, you ugly.